And Sandy, thank you for that amazing IMC3. That was breathtaking. Apparently I missed the good old days with wardrobe malfunctions, Legendary. It's good to see all of you. Good morning. Happy Mother's Day. I've been thinking a bit about this week and about Mother's Day in general. And I want to try to give a talk today that combines conversation or questions about the sacred feminine, about Mother and about Mother Earth, and what I'm calling the call of our age. Would you agree that something's going on in our culture when it comes to the masculine and feminine? And with gender, male and female. And those are different things, by the way. And in some respects, here's I guess, one of my statements. I guess it's a kind of premise or assumption or guess or belief of mine. I don't know if we can experience the healing that's needed in our homes and in our communities and on the earth without the integration of the masculine and feminine, without deep, intentional conversations about the masculine and the feminine, without, from a depth psychology point of view, discovering the inner masculine and the inner feminine, regardless of your gender. This is in all the great stories and myths and religions and spiritual traditions. It's in the yin and the yang, which has to do with light and darkness and shadow and goodness, and also the masculine and the feminine. I was driving on the way here, and I passed through Spring Lake, and I see that rendition of the Pieta of Mary holding Jesus at the Catholic Church there on the way in on the left-hand side of the street as I'm driving in. There it is, the masculine and the feminine, just right at the center. And we know we need a conversation around this stuff, so that's all I'm trying to do today, is start a conversation. In some ways, I'm going to give you the end of my talk, which is more of a question. And here are the questions. What's your relationship like with the sacred feminine? What's your relationship like with the feminine, period? Personally, and also in the stories that you tell and in your cultures and in your family, what is your relationship like with the sacred feminine? How would you define the sacred feminine? If you don't come at 9 o'clock very often, I encourage you to do so sometime. Right over there, we meet at 9 o'clock before the service. And we have some of the most interesting and rewarding conversations of my entire week. Our question this morning was, what the heck is the sacred feminine? And we all got to be students of one another for 45 minutes or 50 minutes. Having, I think, in some respects, some of the most important conversations we can be having. Now, as fate would have it, I was thinking a bit about the sacred feminine. Two things happened. One, I had a dream in which I was standing at a fireplace and I was arranging the wood, and all of a sudden the wind came and lit the fire in the fireplace. And my family was complaining, why did you light the fire? It wasn't time. I was like, I don't know. I couldn't do anything about it. And when I woke up, it reminded me a bit of the feminine, in fact. Here I was at the fireplace of a home. And not by my choosing, but by some fire, unbidden by me, here comes life and also death at the same time. Fire is one of those interesting images. I don't know why I'm telling you my dreams, other than, why not? And the other is the very large 1,500-page multi-year climate study was released this week. And maybe you saw the headlines. The headlines were something like 1 million plant and animal species are at risk of extinction. One of the things I'm challenging myself to do, which I'm not very good at, and I have to admit that, is try to get beyond the headlines, because that's all we have right now. Our headlines, and Twitter is just like, vomiting of headlines, and you don't really know always what's behind any of this stuff. So I decided I was like, I'll just read the report, and when I downloaded it, I realized it was 1,500 pages. I was like, well, you can't do it all, but I tried. I sort of started to do some reading, some digging, because I wondered what was going on. And I think, now here's another sort of belief I have, that we can't begin a different course of action in our contemporary world without a relationship with the feminine and without a relationship or realigning our relationship with Mother Earth. And what's interesting about Mother Earth, and here it is, Mother's Day, is that something like that exists in every single religion and spiritual community that we know of on Earth. Now, that's a huge statement, and you can go and try and prove me wrong with Google if you want. But the sacred feminine and a relationship with the earth as feminine seems to be in every culture. Not so much in the industrialized West. We talk about Mother Earth, but that's not been so much the way we've learned to relate to the sustainer of life in that sense. I mean, maybe you don't have a great relationship with your mom, but and Mother's Day can be a painful day for many people. And by the way, if you're like into Jung, as I am, everybody's got a problem with their mom. So Mother's Day is like one of those drags up all kinds of complications and beauties. But here's my point. You probably wouldn't treat your own mother the way we've treated the earth. Correct? So we need a realignment. And those are the kinds of things that we're hovering around. And I wanted to begin with some facts about, because I tried to read this 1,500-page, and I want to prove to you that I really read it, or parts of it. So I'm just going to give you a few things from it. And facts are interesting because, especially scientific facts, because a certain measure of doubt is always built in. That's what makes science science. They say we've collected some evidence, and it seems to be pointing to certain conclusions. And I think we have a responsibility now to be adults and to look hard at facts and not just get swept away by headlines. And I'm preaching to myself, but here are some things. First of all, the study involved hundreds of experts and thousands of studies. So this isn't, one guy in a basement, And it was adopted, the conclusions were adopted by 131 countries. That seems like a lot to me. I don't even know how many countries there are, but in other words, 131 countries said, we agree, whatever that means. So we're getting close to what we would call consensus in the scientific community. And here are some facts. The abundance of native plant and animal life has fallen by about 20% in the last 100 years. So native plants and animals the abundance of native plants and animals has fallen about 20% in 100 years. So that's kind of a lot. Let's shrink that down. If 20% of you were to go away over the next year, we would be alarmed. Correct? Or if you went to your family reunion and it was only 10 years, the last one you went to was 10 years ago and 20% of the people were missing, you'd wonder, hey, what's going on? Right? I don't know why I thought of those as analogies. It's kind of dark, but happy Mother's Day. One of the things they're saying about local climate change is that our local ecosystems are changing too rapidly. And I won't read you the statistics, but ecosystems always change. The problem is they're changing too rapidly. And adaptation can't maintain the same pace in which the ecosystems are transforming. So this is alarming. Here's another observation from the report. Food security and clean water are now the major risks on the planet. And I know there are other ones, but food security and clean water. And they're basically saying, you don't believe me? Well, wait 50 years. Do you know Russia? Yes, that country that likes our Facebook accounts. Russia has tried to implement, it's a bit more of a dictatorship if you haven't noticed, They don't want any genetically modified food by the year 2030, I think, because they're primarily concerned about food security. Yes, the Russians are ahead of the Americans in this respect. Now, they're doing it as a survival mechanism. They say food security is so paramount, we have to protect our way of eating, not to mention clean water. Here's a direct quote from the report. The biosphere, upon which humanity as a whole depends, is being altered to an unparalleled degree across all spatial scales. Biodiversity, meaning the diversity within species, between species, and ecosystems, is declining faster than at any time in human history. 25% of animals and plants on Earth are under threat. That's where they get that 1 million figure. 25% of animals and plants on Earth are under threat. Again, you're at a family reunion, and you realize 25% of your extended family is in serious threat of extinction. Now, part of you is like, yeah. Just kidding. You would be alarmed, correct? You'd wonder, is there anything we can do about this? The global rate of extinction is 10 to 100 times higher than at any time in the last 10 million years. By the way, facts are hard like this. I don't think we've evolved to take on such big numbers, honestly. Like, if someone's like, the deficit is $1 trillion, I was like, I don't even know what that means. Like, if we can get down to the 9s and 10s, I'm okay there. But beyond that, it's like we can't even comprehend such scales. But that's the kind of scale. 10 to 100 times faster than at any point in the last 10 million years. That's how quickly things are changing. 3 more statistics, just to brighten your day. 75% of all land surface on Earth has been altered by human beings. 75% of all land surface has been altered by human beings. 66% of ocean area has increasing cumulative impacts from human waste. 66% of the ocean. Have you ever flown to Europe? I have. It's a long ways. And a lot of that you're crossing the ocean. And part of you feels like, oh my God, what is this place? It's so vast. 66% of that is experiencing serious effects from the way we live our lives. That's a lot of ocean. And here's one that's particularly poignant for West Michigan and for Michigan in general. 85% of wetlands have been lost. You know, I often think about this. I didn't know this exact statistic, but and these are tragedies. I'm not making light of them in any respect, but when our coastlines are slammed by hurricanes and there's a lot of loss of life and massive property destruction, it is a loss. It's also built on wetlands that are meant to absorb such things. We did that. We chose that in our greed for 75% of the land surface being altered. New Orleans is already underwater because it's underwater. We just decided we wanted to live there and alter the structure of the land to make it. And by the way, how many of you are Dutch? Okay. Now the Dutch are smart, all right? The Dutch said, hey, we're kind of screwed, so we're going to figure out how to make a dike system that can last 10,000 years and survive a storm that comes once every 10,000 years. That's a little higher than like once every 10 years or once every 100 years, which is the Army Corps of Engineers. Anyway, that's just a side note, just to praise the Dutch. All right, that's enough statistics. Why am I giving you all this lovely news? Because it's Mother's Day. And we have to have a conversation between mother as an archetype mother as a symbol, and the earth itself. This dynamic relationship, the sustainer of all things. If you're here, sitting here, you did not bring yourself into existence, believe it or not. You can't say, there's no such thing as a self-made man. Correct? So we know that, even our own tiny little lives, part of honoring the feminine and honoring our own mothers is an acknowledgement that a lot of suffering and heartache and sacrifice went into my being here, and of no choosing of my own. And that is also extended to the earth. And so you can buy cards on Mother's Day, and I'm just trying to go just beneath the surface of that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But I'm saying, what else? What else does it mean to honor what's sustaining and nurturing and the cycle of life itself? Now, as I was reading this climate report, I was reminded of a story. And the story comes from Greek mythology. Now, one of the amazing things about Greek mythology is that in terms of the earth, they had 3 mother goddesses, because one wasn't enough. They had Gaia. You've heard of Gaia, yes? Gaia was the subterranean forces and a way of speaking about earth as a whole, as a whole round cyclical mystery. That's Gaia. The other is Rhea, and that's the power. That's the goddess that brings spring forth, or the energy with which things come up out of the ground. That's Rhea. Has to be honored, otherwise things don't come up out of the ground. Tulip time is Rhea saying something can emerge up out of the crusty, cruel April soil. The third is Demeter. And Demeter is the one who presides over agriculture. And Demeter was probably the most popular because these were still agrarian-based societies. And there was a very strong recognition that if we don't take care of the agricultural cycles or the earth, we're in serious trouble. We can't eat. And actually, one of the things that contributed to the decline of the Roman Empire was running out of wheat. They just kept extending the empire out further, taking more and more wheat from the outer reaches of the empire. Anyway, so Demeter is the god who is associated with agriculture and has power over the earth's crust. Matter means earth, mother. Mother Earth is what Demeter means. Now, Demeter, interestingly enough, is most well known from the story of her daughter Persephone. Persephone is out picking flowers one day, and the whole tradition of giving cut flowers, like some of you received today, that's the Persephone story. I know we think we're all sophisticated and we're just following whatever Hallmark tells us what to do, but it's a little older than that. So she's out picking, cutting flowers, and Hades, in his sort of lust and greed for beauty and for springtime and for the feminine, snatches Persephone and takes her down to hell, or Hades. It's not really hell. It's not the Christian hell. It's the underworld. And Demeter is very upset by this whole reality because she can't find her daughter. So she begins to roam the earth, takes on human form, and eventually ends up living with a family. I won't give you all of the details, but in her grief, the earth stops bearing fruit. And a drought and a famine break out. Which, by the way, let's go ahead and start reading what the symbols are saying here. If you don't take care of Mother Earth, what happens? Famine, drought, lack of water, and nothing will spring forth. I'm telling you, that is true. That is a universal, non-negotiable truth. And they needed stories. People need stories to remind them of this truth. So anyway, Demeter is roaming the earth looking for Persephone, can't find her. And it's fairly dark. Eventually, Zeus gets involved, and they find out where Persephone is, and they make an exchange. Persephone comes up out of the underworld, but meanwhile, while she's down there, she eats the sacred pomegranate, and she doesn't actually get to come up except for half the year. So half the year, Persephone's underground. The other half of the year, she's above ground, which you could say, oh, they're just trying to explain the cycles of the earth. And are they trying to explain the cycles of the earth? They are. The cycles of winter, summer, spring, fall, that's in the myth itself, but it's something more than that. It's a way of saying, if we don't allow what is more powerful than us, the way things are, the cycles, the natural rhythms of Mother Earth, we're going to be in serious trouble. Things have to go underground, lie fallow. We have to wait in that darkness of winter, and we have to long for the emergence of spring. We have to allow, at times, the ground to not be tilled. This is, by the way, in the Jewish tradition, once every 7 years in the Old Testament times. We plant nothing. They're doing the exact same thing. We must honor that our own dependence comes from, in this case, a goddess that has to be honored. Earth itself. Am I making sense? Now, I'm just getting to the interesting part. Now, in the middle of the Demeter myth, I got to get the name right. Demeter hears about a guy named Erysichthon. And Erysichthon cuts down the sacred forests of Demeter. And she's pissed. So she punishes him with an insatiable hunger. Okay? So, time out. There's a guy named Erysichthon who cuts down the sacred forests of Demeter. Wait a minute. 75% of land surface has been altered. Cuts down the sacred forests of Demeter, and she curses him with an insatiable hunger. In other words, it's never, ever enough. Do you know how we're going to get from 75% to 100%? Insatiable hunger for more and more and more and more and more until it's all gone. So what he does in the story, he ends up selling everything he has until he's down to his daughter. His daughter develops some magical forms of something and changes herself into an animal, and he sells the animal. Only to change herself back to a different animal, comes back home, and then he sells that animal, and it's an endless cycle. Endless cycle of selling, until he ends up eating his own limbs. He ends up eating his own arms and hands and feet and legs. That's where the insatiable hunger will take you. Do you see how wise this story is? Do you see how this story is about today? If you do not learn to honor the sacred feminine, Mother Earth, what sustains all life, you will literally eat your own limbs until there's nothing left. How close are we? 75% of the land surface is altered in our insatiable hunger. 66% of the oceans are full of our pollutants, and we have altered 85% of all wetlands. When does it stop? That's the question. Part of the answer, I'm saying, is in coming back into a right relationship with the sacred feminine. Not just, I think I'd like to talk about the sacred masculine another time, because that is a needed conversation. If you haven't been able to tell what is going on in our political system, I don't think qualifies as the sacred masculine. There's a lot of male energy, but not a lot of what we might call the sacred masculine. But sacred masculine, as we talked about in the 9 o'clock, what I wrote some things down that people said. Aim, purpose, change, making things happen, power, courage, bravery. These are on the sacred side. Femininity, we talked about receptivity, life cycles, compassion, nurturing, the turning over, the saying yes to life. So these things rest in a kind of tension. What I'm saying is to find our way back in many respects, so we don't end up eating our own limbs in a suicidal way, is in relation to the sacred feminine. And what does that have to do with today? Today's a day of the celebration of the sacred feminine. It is. It's not just your mother, it's the mother. It's both. So again, my question is, what is your relationship like with the sacred feminine, internally and externally? And then the next question is, what is your relationship like with the earth, even with the simple things like your lawn? It really does come down to ecosystems in the smallest sense. I know these problems are overwhelming. The only way to deal with a little overwhelming problem is one tiny bit at a time. We know that. So, let's talk a bit more about the sacred feminine. I thought I would, as a way of broadening the conversation, I thought I would just list some stories, phrases, and archetypes to sort of expand what we think of as the feminine in general. The reason why I want to do so is because if you haven't noticed, corporations control Mother's Day, right? It's a made-up holiday, first of all. But what are you supposed to do on Mother's Day? Tell me. Buy stuff. What did I do yesterday? I bought some stuff. Okay, and I'm not against these things, but I just think it's a very interesting way of relating to the sacred feminine. We're going to buy things. And the kinds of things we're going to buy, corporations have already decided, here's what qualifies as the feminine. All right? And it's dainty, and it's cut flowers, and that's a very beautiful thing. Persephone's out there cutting her flowers. Lovely. She's going to get taken to hell soon, but still a lovely image. So I want to bring it in, and again, I'm saying this as a male. So I'm only, I'm doing so with as much humility as I can. So I want to give you some images of what we mean by the sacred feminine that take us up out of the Hallmark greeting card. All right. One of the things that this comes from Jung, and you can tell I have a personal obsession with Carl Jung. I bring him up every week, so I'm sorry. Maybe I'll get over it. I doubt it. Here's what he says. Spiritual rebirth, which is at the very heart of the feminine, he says, is in all times and in all places. So the very notion of enlightenment or rebirth, remember Jesus says, if you want to enter the kingdom of God, you must be born again. Hinduism is the process of rebirth. He says that's part of the sacred feminine, and it exists in all times and all places and all cultures. It's just behind the screen of culture. He calls it the dual mother. You're born twice. You have a mother, and then you're born again. By the way, both Freud and Jung are obsessed with a painting by Da Vinci. And the painting has Saint Anne, who's Jesus' grandmother, has Mary, and then Jesus in the corner playing with a lamb. Look it up sometime online. They have entire books, both Freud and Jung, just on this image, which they're talking about the dual mother. There's some mystery of you're born twice in this world. There's the great mother that gives us all birth. There's your actual mother. That's a kind of dual mother. There's I'm born and I go about life, and then there's a possibility of me being born again into greater consciousness and awareness, which has to do with our relationship with the feminine, by the way, if you're a male, and maybe the other way around if you're a female. Anyway, so this image of the dual mother is part of the very heart of what we would call spiritual transformation. Did you know in Latin, the baptismal font is called the uterus ecclesia? Yeah. How polite. Okay? They know. Like there's something, they don't, actually I should say, they don't even know what they're dealing with. A bunch of male priests were like, let's call it the uterus ecclesia. They don't realize what they're playing with. Okay? I'll give you another quote from Jung here. The mother imago is the great illusionist, he says. See, now I'm just trying to expand what we mean by the feminine. The great illusionist, the seductress, who draws one into life. Not only into life's reasonable and useful aspects, because that's nice. I'd like my mom to be just reasonable and useful, you know? He says, not just that, but into the frightful paradoxes and ambivalences of good and evil, success and ruin, hope and despair. Put that on a Hallmark card. Okay? It's a good idea, yeah. Let's start a company. Like more authentic Hallmark cards. This is what he also says. Because she has, for a man, she is a man's greatest danger and demands from him his greatest. To bump into the feminine is to be terrified, is what Jung is saying. And not just a female, that's terrifying enough, but the sacred feminine, because it takes you into the paradoxes of life and death. Which reminds me of another image. How many of you ever seen the goddess Kali? Kali, Indian goddess. Okay, many arms typically. And she stands there, and in one hand she holds the severed head of a man, and on her foot she's stepping on the god Shiva. Yeah, how's that also for a Mother's Day card? We'll add it to our list, all right? Okay, something in that image says that the sacred feminine will cut off the head of a man. You think I'm joking? Okay, how many have ever dated, all right? By the way, the psychological interpretation of that has something like this. The Kali energy cuts off the head of the ego. So you can't, the ego, the unchecked male ego, ruins the world. So you need Kali and all of her terrifying power to create life, because she's both the creator and the destroyer at the same time. She's the mother of creation and the destroyer. That's why she's standing there as the mother of creation with a severed head in her hand. Now that is a fairly expansive image of the sacred feminine. Am I right? Okay. This is fun. All right. I'll give you one more, and just kind of, I don't want to go on too long here because we could be here forever. And here's the reason why. This is from the book Women Who Run with the Wolves. One thing about this land of the sacred feminine, one thing about this land is certain. It is old. It's old. The sacred feminine is old. Very, very, very old. How old? She says, older than the oceans. It has no age. It's timeless. It's eternal. It has no age. It's ageless. And then she goes even beneath the surface and beneath the image of the mother. Because the mother is one thing. The mother is also a role. What's beneath the mother role? She's trying to get around in that terrain of the sacred feminine. Listen to what she says. The wild woman archetype finds this layer emanating from the instinctual psyche. So what's beneath the roles? There's an instinctual psyche down there. It gets better. Although she can take on many guises in our dreams and creative experiences, this wild woman archetype, although she can take on many guises in our dreams and creative experiences, she is not from the layer of the mother. The maiden, the medial woman. She's not the inner child. Do you see how, now I'm going back to, I'm picking on Hallmark, you know, is that even a company anymore? Okay. But I'm this is not a stretch to say they like the maiden, the medial woman, the pretty, the childlike. She's poking around on what's beneath that. She goes on, she is not the queen, the Amazon, the lover, the seer. She is just what she is. Call her la que sabe, the one who knows. Call her the wild woman. Call her la loba, which means wolf. Call her by her names high and low. Call her by newer names or ancient ones. She remains just what she is. Wild woman as an archetype is in an ineffable force which carries a bounty. It carries a bounty of ideas, images, and particularities for humankind. So somewhere in the substratas here, there's an instinctual force, something wild and untamed. Think of Kali standing there with the power to create and destroy. That's the layer we're talking about. And in that layer contains all kinds of creative possibilities that human beings need. Down there, deep, in the archetypal, in the sacred feminine, which gives birth to the possibility of a more healthy future. And if you don't honor it, and you say, we don't need it, thank you very much, we've already figured it out, we're in serious trouble. And if there's an element of the masculine, which there is, that is about aim and direction and rearranging things and objects and taking, and let's go to this land and that land, that has to be counterbalanced by nurturing, creativity, nourishment, depth, staying put, has to be counterbalanced. Otherwise, we're in trouble. And we're in trouble. Wouldn't you agree? We're eating our limbs. And not even our daughters can sacrifice enough to bring us back. One more line from her. It would appear that its glow, this sacred feminine, the glow, it would appear that its glow, its voice, its fragrance. Think about Persephone. What drew her to the woods was the fragrance of these flowers. It would appear that its glow, its voice, its fragrance are meant to cause us to be raised up from contemplating the shit on our tails. The sacred feminine, she's saying, raises us up from contemplating the shit on our tails. To what? To occasionally traveling in the company of stars. Without a reintegration of the sacred feminine, we'll contemplate the shit on our tails until we consume all of our limbs. Seriously. So again, it's just a question. What's your relationship like with the sacred feminine? Thanks for listening.